actually hit record while I'm
There you
here.
go.
So,
Okay, I did it.
there we go.
I did it.
Fabulous.
Awesome. Now we're ready.
All right.
Good morning.
Okay. Thank you
Have a
so much.
fantastic
Thank you,
presentation. I'm
Lori.
going to go back to my student. No problem.
All right.
Bye now.
All right. Have a good one. Okay. So everyone, we are here today in this workshop to address or present promoting counselor self-care as part of effective supervision. And I'm Dr. Debra Napier, and my co-presenter is Millicent Cahoon, who was actually a student of mine and has recently been accepted into the DOT program at University of Louisville, right?
Yes.
All right, congratulations. So let me bring up my PowerPoint now. Okay, so let's slideshow. Okay, come on. Let's from the beginning. Okay, here we go. All right, so Millicent, I'll let you start.
Absolutely. So let's just start off with the importance. So if we continue to dismiss personal care in the supervision training process, many aspects of the student's experience is going to be at stake. So the lack of supervision models implementing self-care has caused many counseling students to feel stressed, unsupported, and burnt out even before they're done with school. So what we want to do is to maintain professional boundaries with our supervisors, but just also add in that unique piece of processing what's going on in your personal life and just how it is working with those clients. So according to the ACA and KCREP, it's mandatory for each counseling program to promote wellness and talk with students about self-care. And the counselor has to maintain that self-care with themselves and colleagues in order to sustain energy to work with clients in very difficult situations. And if you do not have the self-care, it can become very burdensome over time. So our field is so unique from other fields because we have to value taking care of ourselves before we can take care of others. And we're seeing a lot now in other fields that they are now taking care of mental health, and they're understanding that it's an important component of being a working person. But what makes our job so unique is that it's centered around emotionality, vicarious trauma, and just being present for people who come in dysregulated. So while this idea of self-care is constantly promoted, it has not always been executed with the best efforts from clinicians. So there's been so much research on the absence of promotion of self-care. And one study that I think is very important to talk about is the study by Ort in 2015. Other researchers were part of this as well, and it was an hour-and-a-half informational session on wellness. Discussed the effects of not maintaining wellness with the students. They emphasized burnout, compassion fatigue, and possible eventual disinterest in the field. And then after this one informational session, they did not discuss the topic anymore about wellness. And what they found out from the study was that students reported poor wellness during their program. So this further confirms the importance of ongoing psychoeducation and encouragement for counselors in training in their self-care. So with this issue continuing to stigmatize future counselors, it's time for us counselors to supervise these counselors in training and make sure that there's some type of model implemented to address the self-care issue.
Okay. All right, so as Millicent mentioned, and I'll kind of go back over it, ACA says that counselors need to engage in self-care activities to maintain and promote their own emotional, physical, mental, and spiritual well-being to best meet their professional responsibilities. And that's in the ACA Code of Ethics 2014. KCREP also says that counselor education programs must document where each of the lettered standards are covered in the curriculum. Self-care strategies are appropriate to the counselor role. So I want to talk for a minute about, why it's important to engage in self-care when we're supervising our students, because it really should become a part of who we are, what we do. Post-graduation and even when we become fully licensed, we want to make sure that counseling students understand that will actually internalize the need to engage in self-care. when we think about what I talk about with my students, what I talk about with my students when I'm supervising them in practicum and an internship is, you know, when you get into those areas of our work, which is past the coursework, when you're actually working with live clients, there's a lot of emotionality and trauma that goes on in a counseling room between a client or clients and a therapist. And if you don't learn how to take care of yourself, and we'll talk about that later, you can end up having some burnout and compassion fatigue. So it's very important that every week, at least some effort be included, or some area be included in the supervision process that talks about self-care. So some of our best practices are, as you can see, that supervisors will have fair and regular assessments, and that the supervisor will encourage the supervisee to self-assess, self-evaluate in the area of self-care, what's going on at home, in your own personal life. I think that that is a misnomer in the human services field, and certainly in ours, that because we have this training and education that we don't have problems, and if we do, our abilities in the area of clinical skills and background and training and education prevents us from having problems, and that's not true. We have to learn how to take care of ourselves. Supervisors need to require supervisees to complete self-evaluations and help the supervisee develop self-reflection and self-evaluation skills. Learn to be honest with themselves, which begins with learning to be honest with the supervisor during supervision when things are rough, and being able to talk about it. Not that supervision is a therapeutic environment, but it is an area where a supervisee should feel comfortable talking about, hey, this is going on in my life, and I really need to do some things, and can we kind of work on a plan, which might include asking the supervisee to actually go and see a therapist on their own. So we also need to take appropriate steps when remediation is necessary. And, you know, I think about over the years, the different situations that students have come or supervisees have come in front of me. And I remember one particular time, one of my supervisees was having difficulty at home in her relationship. And she just had she had a new baby. And I went into the workroom one day, and I could tell she had been crying. And so I said, you know, how are you doing? Is everything okay? I see you look like you're upset. And she said, I'm having some difficulties with my husband. And I asked her, was she safe? And she said, yes, she was. And she had an older daughter that was maybe like 10 that wasn't her husband's child. I asked her, was that child and the new baby safe? And she said, yes. Part of the dissension in the home was that he didn't want her 10-year-old to live with them anymore. So she had taken the little girl over to her grandmother's house, and she was watching her. So we kind of talked about some things that maybe she needed to do personally to take care of herself. And I talked to her about, you know, you seem like you're in a bad way emotionally, and certainly understandably, what can I do to help you get through this? And she said, I'll make it. I need to finish. I want to get through my practicum so I can get into my internships and move on. And I talked to her about, you know, I understand the goal. I've been a student myself, but the reality of it is, you know, if you're going to take care of somebody else in a counseling session, then you need to take care of yourself. So she didn't want to stop. And so one day I was in my office, and we had a brand new family coming in for counseling, and she was walking past my office to the counseling room, and the family was in front of her. And as she walked past, I could see that she was literally getting ready to break down. So I immediately got up and continued to escort the family into the counseling room, and I asked her to come into my office, and I closed the door, and immediately she just broke down and started crying. And I said, you can't see clients like this. You know, I said, how are you going to go in there with this family and so I said, you need to take some time off and you need to do what you need to do. And she did eventually, and she came back and she'd been to therapy and she was much healthier. And so that's just an example of what we need to do. So we want to make sure that we're not being punitive to students, but we definitely have to step in sometimes. And sometimes it doesn't mean that the student needs to leave and come back. They can work through these things, but they need that room and safety, if you will, to process things that, because again, the fact that we're trained to be clinicians doesn't mean that life doesn't show up. Okay, so let me go to the next slide. So in one study in 2010, 2/3 of participants identified a counselor they knew was suffering from burnout. That's quite a bit. And you can tell if you're working in an office when people are, kind of becoming cynical or short, if you will. So that's, to me, a red flag that 2/3 of participants in this study knew someone who was suffering from burnout, which means that that person was still coming in to the office. Studies also found that there is a minimal attention to self-care and wellness, and I think Millicent talked about that a little bit when she opened. Some informal sessions at the onset of a counseling program, but no concerted effort to really integrate self-care as part of the curriculum in the study. So Millicent can attest to this, having been a student of mine. Even when I'm teaching a class that quote unquote may not necessarily pertain to what you would think about in the area of self-care, I talk about it. I actually have one whole class where that's all we talk about is self-care. What's going on at your site? How do you set up your office so that you're safe? A lot of different factors that I think oftentimes students don't obviously know or recognize. And I think that some owners of agencies and maybe some supervisors have been doing it for a while and don't think about it. So I try to bring the students awareness, and where there are issues, have them go back and speak to their site supervisor about those concerns. So let's see. So some studies demonstrated that one informal session about wellness was not enough for students to maintain their level of personal wellness. And I think that's what we're saying here, is that we want to make this something that students take past graduation and actually internalize and utilize on an ongoing basis, as far as learning to engage in honest awareness and self-care. And even after you've graduated, partnership with a colleague or two and have ongoing consultation where you can talk about your needs and how maybe one or two of the clients are really kind of, unsettling to you in the area of, you're either feeling sorry for them or you're feeling a little bit agitated about their behavior, and you may need to really process where that's coming from in consultation post-graduation, as you would in supervision while you're in school. So here are, burnout commonly refers to feelings of emotional fatigue due to work-related stress, and counselors are often unaware of burnout or ignore the symptoms. Now, the challenge is a lot of times is that for people who counseling is their sole source of income, how do you choose between the recognition of your burnout, things are going on in your own life, and it's kind of like becoming a mountain or overwhelming to you when you're trying to integrate what's going on in your sessions with your clients. And if you stop, you don't have any money. So that is an issue that some areas that we really need to think about, how we can, when we're, say, supervising a site or running an agency, make sure that the people that work for us can live financially, but still have the opportunity to take care of themselves. I remember 30 years ago, one of my friends, and we're still friends today, we did child foster care together, said to me, we take care of everybody else. Who takes care of us when we're in trouble? And I said, you know, and they don't care. They want those stats and those deadlines met. And in the meantime, the reality of it is when we're not at our optimum self, which includes engaging in self-care and taking care of ourselves, we're not as helpful or helpful at all to our clients. We can actually do harm. So it's important to note that. All right. So studies have found that counselors often teach clients self-care, but often don't engage in ongoing self-care. So that's another issue, is that we're good at preaching, but are we good at practicing what we preach? We would talk to our clients about what are you doing in these areas. We would teach them or help them learn and identify some healthy coping skills, maybe even something just about sleep hygiene. But do we engage in that ongoing self-care? Signs of counselor burnout can include cynicism, inflexibility within themselves and with others, and distancing from affects the counselor-client relationship. Literature focuses on eating healthy and getting enough sleep, but self-care involves much, much more than that. So, what does burnout look like? Perfectionism are contributing factors. Using others' needs to meet our own needs. I think those of us who have worked with students have seen this a lot. They're trying to work out their own life problems in the lives of their clients. Another contributing factor is anxiety, self-doubt, challenges in our own family, employment, substance use, physical and mental disabilities. Counselors are routinely exposed to painful situations, traumatic circumstances, and overwhelming emotions. And that really is just a fact about what we do. We can't get around that. People are coming to us because of pain, trauma, or just overwhelming emotions. And that's our work. We chose this, we've known this as we've pursued our studies and done practicum and internship. So the ACA commissioned a task force actually on impaired counselors in 2003. And the results of the study reveal that there are 3 areas that are part of addressing impaired counselors. The first is the need to educate counselors and educators in the area of prevention and resiliency. So that's part number 1. Number 2 is the need to educate about resources, interventions, and treatment for impaired counselors. And the third is advocacy for impaired counselors within the state and national level to assist impaired counselors. The working definition of an impaired counselor, according to the task force, is therapeutic impairment occurs when there is a significant negative impact on a counselor's professional functioning, which compromises client care or poses the potential for harm to the client. Impairment may be due to substance abuse, chemical dependency, mental illness, personal crisis that can include traumatic events or vicarious trauma, burnout, life crisis, and physical illness or debilitation. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Millicent.
And Millicent, I'm sorry, this is Dr. Stretch. If I could interrupt for just a second. I just want to remind everybody to stay on mute while the presenters are presenting. And also, if your name is not fully showing on your video file or tile, please click on your video tile, and in the upper right-hand corner, there are 3 dots. Click on that and then select rename and make sure your full name is showing, or we will not be able to award you continuing ed credit for being in attendance. We must have your full name in order to award attendance credit. So sorry, Millicent, for interrupting. We forgot to announce that at the beginning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so let's talk about the 3 dimensions of self-care. We have essential self, social self, and coping self. So what essential self encompasses is taking care of what makes up your individuality and your personality. So that includes spirituality, what you believe in, gender identity, being a man or a woman, being masculine, feminine, then your cultural identity. So this is about your race and ethnicity. And then let's go on to social self. And that's all about taking care of the interpersonal relationships in your life with your friends, family, or significant others. And all of those relationships should be centered around friendship and love in a healthy way. And then our coping self, it helps us to use toolkits that help us remain resilient in stressful situations. Some ways that can be helpful is through leisure, having that stress management, working on your self-worth, and mastering your realistic beliefs. So all of these dimensions work together to give us a holistic view of wellness. And if one is struggling at one point, we can lean on the other dimensions for help at that time. I'll go to the next slide. Okay, there we go. And then so let's talk about some self-compassion. And this is very difficult for a lot of counselors because we're working with people who come to us with some very difficult situations. And sometimes we think that we have to put our all into that situation without taking care of ourselves. And it's important as counselors to know that we cannot help someone who's dysregulated if we're dysregulated. So we have to make sure that we are checking in on ourselves and having that self-compassion. So what is self-compassion? It's the ability to be open to our own suffering and working towards our own healing, and then learning to accept our humanness, and that's important. So when we are accepting our humanness, we are allowing room for error, and we're allowing room for a self-care break when needed. There's going to become times when there's things in our personal lives that are a struggle to us, and we have to make sure that we adhere to that and not just take care of it, but feel okay knowing that we are taking that time for ourselves, that we need a break. And when we're in that supervision with a supervisor, it feels really good to have that affirmed, that I understand that you're going through a rough time, and I respect your decision to do whatever you need to do to make sure that you can be the best counselor that you can be for your client. So a kindness, awareness of our own suffering and that of others. Compassion is a boost that allows us to be open and moved by our own suffering, experiencing feelings of caring and kindness towards oneself, taking an understanding and non-judgmental attitude towards one's inadequacies and failures, and recognizing that our own experience is part of the common human experience. So as we think about self-compassion, let's think about it as empathy. So we have empathy for our clients, but this time it's just having that empathy for yourself. And this can help us to accept our own inadequacies and limitations that we may have. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at a model that I think does a very good job at considering the client's needs. A lot of people might already know about this model. It's called the Woops Model, and it was created in 2010 by researchers Lenz and Smith. And this model is a collaborative model between the clinician and the clinician in training that starts by first educating the supervisee on what wellness is, and then trying to figure out what exactly wellness means to that clinician in training. And then next, they follow up with an assessment to see which approach of self-care works best for them. And then following that assessment, both the clinician and the clinician in training work together to make a routine for the CIT, that's the clinician training, that they can use throughout their training. But what's most important to know about this, and what I think this model does a great job of, is not just implementing some type of self-care routine for the clinician training while they're in supervision, but making sure that there is a continual assessment. So when you have that continual assessment, you're able to see what needs to be adjusted to meet that counselor in training's needs at that time. And so that's the main points that I want to just put on the slide. Continual wellness assessment, using formal planning and evaluation of activities that could be useful during their time in school program. And then they should be also selecting the domains of wellness for development that have a positive impact. And then again, this is all about encouraging that clinician in training to have that openness and safe space to not only talk about their clients, but then to also talk about how they're doing. And I just have an example of when that was very important to me. While I was in school, I had 2 internships. The first one was very superficial. It was come in the meeting, let's make sure we're meeting for that perfect hour, let's talk about the clients, the number of clients for next week, and what you're implementing. That's the end. I did not feel very supported at all. And then at my second internship, we took half of the time to talk about how it was dealing with clients and what was going on. But then what made it so important and special to me is that that supervisor took the time to ask me, how are you doing? How are you feeling about this? That seemed like that was a really heavy session. Can we unpack that for a moment or process that so that you can leave out here with a sense of calmness? And just having her check in with me like that made me feel so much more supported, and I wasn't as stressed as I was at my other site because my wellness was considered, and then I also was growing my own therapeutic relationship in a healthy good boundaries with a supervisor. And that's what's going to, I believe, make a student successful in a counseling program. Okay, so as we conclude this presentation, we just want to leave you with a few self-care ideas that you can fit into your clinician toolbox for both you and that clinician training that you're with. So self-care can look like any of the following: taking a short break between sessions, breathing techniques, following a schedule that includes lunch breaks, meditation and prayer, seeking consultation, personal counseling, joining support groups, adequate sleep, social interaction, exercise, healthy diet, reading and journaling. And I just like to say, as someone who really believes in self-care, some things that I do now as an outpatient therapist, I make sure to turn off my work phone by 6 p.m. When I get home, I don't talk about work anymore. I spend time with my partner and I catch up with my friends and family. Especially in times like this where we're quarantined and we're doing a lot of work from home, I'm making sure that I'm doing activities that I've never been interested in doing before. Like I've been doing art and journaling. So just finding unique ways that work for you can be so helpful to keeping you balanced through this, because this is a very amazing and rewarding job, but it just comes with it can be heavy sometimes. There's a lot of vicarious trauma involved, and it can be very stressful. So you just have to take these tips and utilize it for yourself and then for clinicians in training so that they can have that same type of balance in their lives. So from this list, I hope that you can take what you need and start implementing it today, especially during this difficult time. So that concludes our presentation, and we appreciate you joining us today, and we hope that you take care of yourself where self-care is needed.
Okay, thank you. I also wanted to kind of piggyback on what a little bit of Millicent was saying, especially right now with the COVID-19 pandemic that's going on. And I'm finding that most of the students that I'm working with that are in practicum or internship are staying home, and they're doing teletherapy if the agency allows it. And it's a difficult conversation to have with a student who wants to get done, but really starting to drive home the issue of self-care right now. Going into an office, I had a student who asked me, could she go into the office and take temperatures when people come into the office for services, even though they're not doing any therapy right now at her office, in person or teletherapy. And she wanted to know, could she count that as a direct hour? Well, first of all, no, that would not be a direct hour under KCREP standards. But beyond that, do you really want to put yourself and your family and your community in that type of harm's way with a sole focus of, I need to get done with my program? So we've had some pretty rigorous discussions in supervision about the need to, this isn't just about you graduating. People's lives are being upended in a way that we have never seen before, and hopefully when this is over with, won't see again, whenever that may be. But I do want to emphasize that I have found, and this is nothing scientific, but when I've worked with students who are really willing to work with me and engage in openness, honest self-reflection and self-care during supervision weekly, I feel like their outcomes with their clients have been better than those. They don't struggle in the way. those clients who are trying to hold it all together in the midst of what's going on. And I was sharing with Millicent when we were putting this together, one of the instances my own life with self-care was about a year ago. My husband had to have a toe amputated, and it was like a lot of stuff just piling up on me with his self-care. And I was trying to push my way through and still see clients. And I remember I had made up my mind that I was going to take some time off, which I did. But prior to that actual date getting there, I was talking to a client. And the minute they left out the room, I sat in my office and just cried, because I knew then, I said, I have to take off, because I was able to get through the session, but in all honesty, when I look back, was I 100% like I like to be with my clients? No, because of what was going on in my own life. So it's just imperative, and I find Millicent can, attest to this, and I see Alice Arabi in the room, and she was one of the instructors that worked with me at Phoenix. When students will tell you when you talk to them that their supervisors, in many instances, never, as Millicent mentioned, ask them how they're doing, what's going on in their lives. And as I said earlier in the presentation, although we're not therapists when we're doing supervision, there are some therapeutic things that we can do, or strategies. And again, that may be saying, I really think you need to go and get a therapist or join a support group for what, is going on. So I appreciate everybody attending. And with that, we'll open up the floor, Millicent as well, for questions or comments.
Dr. Napier.
Yes, and everybody, this is my daughter, in case you couldn't tell.
I was gonna say that, would you think that one of the reasons that they're not as diligent with self-care is the stigma that could be attached to, you're the mental health professional, you're supposed to have it all together, and you're going through something, you don't know how to handle it or whatever.
Right.
And so part of it could be the individual that's going through it doesn't want to let on that they're having a difficult time.
Absolutely.
And the stigma attached to, you're supposed to be helping me fix my life. So what do you mean you're having issues? And so in instances like that, I would think that that might be a barrier. So maybe even adding a component where we talk about it's okay to have an issue, or it's okay to reach out to somebody for assistance. There's absolutely nothing wrong with talking to somebody. You and I have talks, and you'll say one thing and I'll say, but hey, why can't we look at this other point of view just for a minute? Let me take you outside of what you know. And a lot of times you are receptive and say, wow, I never thought about it like that, because it will take a third person to come in and outside in, I don't know anything about the details, but say, hey, what if you looked at it like this and not like that? And you've also done that for me in my life when I've come to you and said, oh, man, this is going on and I am really struggling with it. And you'll say, well, wait, look at it like this. It may not be about you. And then I start to think about it and I'm like, dang, I'm glad I came and asked you about it. So I just want to give in my 2 cents and say, okay, adding that it's okay to need some help sometimes.
Absolutely. And Dawn and I always joke about we read each other's minds. So she kind of finished part of what I would have said. I do think that we often don't want to admit we need help. Some of that could be a learned lesson in life that we learned as children. It's not safe emotionally or physically or both to ask for help. So I just keep my emotions and my needs to myself, because they're not going to get met anyway. But again, I do think, as I had also said earlier, that Dawn is kind of summarizing for me, is we feel like we supposed to know everything. We got all the training. So if something does arise, we should know how to handle it. And so I think it's up to a supervisor to make that supervisory relationship and space a place of safety where students can come and say, I'm really struggling in this area. I've had students who have lost family members, they're, been angry about it and kind of had to process some of that in supervision, but also encouraging them to go get into a support group or to get therapy. therapy. The other part of this is, again, oftentimes the agencies that we work for, whether it's a private agency or a state agency, they're looking at numbers. They're looking at caseloads. They don't, this, I'm saying this from the perspective of having been a case manager in Health and Human Services, foster care, protective services, a manager, and even as a mid-level manager, trying to buffer the expectations of upper management with what I knew some of my staff was going through and trying to help them through that. So, oftentimes they don't care. I'm speaking about the numbers crunchers, about what is going on in our lives. And they push us in ways, and I think that that was part of one of my earlier slides when I talked about we've got to do some advocacy work on the state and national level at getting agencies to, and mental health agencies and state bodies and those types of things into buying into having a safety net. What do you do for a clinician who's run into a rough patch and they're having difficulty seeing clients? They're talking to you about it. You can see it in their performance, yet if they take off, they don't get paid. And so, we've got to be aware of that. There's got to be some elucidation in that area and an owning of that, a recognition and an owning and a kind of pushing forward in how we can get through. I'm trying to go through some of the questions. Yes, I think, as Jennifer said, it is also important that students understand they're not going to be blacklisted because they come to you and say, my life is in a turmoil right now. And so we can hear you, Donnie.
Oh, I'm sorry. Grandma wanted to see Alice. I'm sorry.
Okay. All right. So how receptive are agencies when you need to take time off from burnout? I think that's a legitimate question. And I can't speak for all agencies. I can say that I know of plenty who do not respect that. They want those numbers met. And even if you're a contractual employee, where you're working and you see clients and there's a split with the agency as far as fees, how do you deal with that? Because if you're not working, you're not getting your split. The problem
is always going to be that the focus is on volume.
Volume,
the focus is on volume. It's not on fixing the problem.
Right, and we've got to change that.
Yeah,
right, and that's part of what the task force from the American Counseling Association in 2013 found, that that's what I'm saying about that. We need to do some advocacy work in the area of reaching out and helping agencies and community agencies develop systems that protect those counselors who are in the midst of a crisis or trauma or some life situation that they need help with. So let me see, I'm trying to keep up with all the questions that have come in. Okay, so Tracy is telling us that ACA puts on a Spotify playlist for burnout during counselor awareness. It's in the chat room. If you go in, you can pull up the link and copy it, and then you'll have it for later.
Wow, that's an amazing thing that Spotify would even have something like that.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that the task force has kind of brought some of that forward, so that, there is education and advocacy going on. It's probably just not wide enough and deep enough to bring everybody into the fold. Okay. The task force, hold on a second. You want that link to where you can find from the task force. Hold on a minute. I gotta look through the task force. You actually can honestly, because I'd have to pull up all my research to tell you the link. Go Google the ACA Task Force 2003 on impaired counselors, and it'll pull you right up to it. That isn't where I found it, but I know you can get it like that. Okay. So I guess really kind of like what I want to close in is saying that the goal of this presentation for myself and for Millicent was to ensure that we grasp the need to include self-care weekly when we're working with our supervisors. That's number one. Number two, that it becomes so internalized by our supervisees that even after they graduate and have their link, that not link, their full license, that they're still engaging in self-care. Alice Raby is in the room. She was one of my instructors at Phoenix. We're still best friends as well. And we regularly engage in ongoing self-care, where we're able to talk to each other about some issues in consultation about clients, you know, Debra or Al, what you think I need to do about this? Or we're blowing off some of that emotionality that we gather when we're seeing clients. And we talk about our personal lives so that when we are engaged with our clients, we're healthy, we're with the clients 100% as opposed to 50% in the room and then 50% thinking about what's going on. And part of the reason that we want to do this, the third component for me, is that I talk a lot about this, especially to beginning counseling students. Most of us come into the human services field because of our own life experiences. That's just, I'm not saying everybody, but a large part. We want to either get in and make a change in society. Sadly, some of us want to get in and fix our lives and the lives of our client. I have seen that on too many occasions. We want to change that. We want counselors to be healthy individuals so that when they interact with their students and, well, for counselor educators, as well as with their clients, that they can be as healthy as can be and be with their clients 100%. So with that, I'll ask if there's any more comments or questions. Let me look in the chat room and see, did anybody else post? Okay. There appears to be a link that's going to be, wait a minute. Make sure your full name is showing on your video feed, which we can see that. To get your CEO to change your name, I think she told you about that. I think you have to stay in the session the entire time, and there'll be a brief evaluation after the presentation to obtain CEs. You may assess the evaluation, and the link is in there. So I'm going to ask everybody to pull up your chat box if you want to complete the link. It's a SurveyMonkey link, and you're going to need to go in there and complete to get the CEs. So open up the chat and you scroll kind of up, and it says, it's from Lori and Stretch. Participants must attend 100% of the session and complete a brief evaluation.
Yeah, and I can repost it. And Dr. Napier, I did a quick search for the 2013 wellness. The 2006 wellness is showing up, but this article, which I'll put in the thing, is showing up. The actual web page for the task force is showing up as no file found.
It's the 2003 task force.
Well, there was one in 2013 too.
Maybe that's a typo then. Maybe
No, there was one. I looked at that. There was one in 2006, and there was one in
2013. You're right. That's a typo in my notes.
Yeah, I found the one from 2006. So I'm putting both of those links in here for people.
Okay.
So both those links are now in the chat, and then.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, happy to help. And then I can repost the CE thing so everybody can see that.
And so, Lori, what they need to do then is go into the SurveyMonkey link outside of this chat room. And,
for every session that you can, you need to fill out. It's the same link no matter what. But you fill out that, and then we'll be sending out CE starting. It takes a few weeks to do the continuing ed, so it'll take a couple of weeks for us to get them out, but we will get them out to everybody.
Okay. All right, well, if no one else has any comments or questions, Millicent, thanks for working on this, and thank you everybody for attending. I hope you learned something and enhanced what you already knew. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you everyone so much. Bye-bye.
Nice meeting you, Millicent.
Nice meeting you too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
How do you end it?